If you're considering buying your own home or potentially investing in Brisbane, then this video is packed with the 15 major reasons why I personally buy in Brisbane. Now, the first reason I buy in Brisbane is the long-term history. A few years ago, I stumbled across some incredible data from homely.com.au looking at Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth over a 50-year period. Now, what I found when looking at the total return in Brisbane divided by the number of years was Brisbane house prices had gone up by an average of 9.7% per annum. What was super surprising to me as someone who grew up in Sydney with a really strong Sydney bias is Sydney during the same period of time had only done 9.6% and Melbourne had only done 9.5%. So Brisbane was actually the top performing capital city of those four markets over the last 50 years. Now, the second reason I invest in Brisbane is when I looked at the ABS data. According to the Australian Bureau of Stats, apparently 75% of Australia's future population, job and income growth is going to come from Melbourne, Sydney and Southeast Queensland or Brisbane. Now, when you look at that split, 25% will be in Sydney, 25% in Melbourne and 25% in Southeast Queensland. Because I try to invest instead of gamble in the properties that I purchase, following that data is going to be super useful for following where the money, the jobs and the infrastructure flow in the future. Now, the third big reason is obviously the coming 2032 Olympic Games. When I look back at the data in Sydney, between 1997 and 2003, house prices in Sydney went up over 97% and rents in the city doubled. Now, the fourth reason I like the look of Brisbane is the positive news that's been coming out from the Australian Financial Review and the Courier Mail recently. Basically, those publications have been getting a whole bunch of Australia's leading economists, as well as the analysts in the banks to predict what they expect or what could happen to Brisbane between now and the 2032 Olympic Games. Now, according to these analysts and the publications, most of them expect house prices to potentially double between now and the Olympic Games, with some of them and some of the suburbs in Brisbane expected to go from an average of 600K to somewhere between 900 and 1.1 mil, and other parts of the city expected to go from an average of 700K to somewhere between 1.3 and 1.5 mil. Now, I have no idea what's going to happen. I think they are kidding themselves. I think they are very, very big gains that they're predicting, but hopefully they're right. Now, the fifth reason I really like Brisbane at the moment was after a conversation I had with the great Phil Anderson. Now, Phil wrote the book, The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking, where he looked at 250 years of booms and busts in America. Now, what Phil had recognized from looking at that data and breaking it into smaller 20-year chunks was that from the bottom of a cycle to the top, Brisbane had done on average more than 120% growth. Now, what's crazy at the moment is many suburbs in Brisbane have really only done between 50 and 70% since the bottom of the cycle. So Phil's prediction, as well as Simon Priestley from Propertyology, is that house prices in certain Brisbane suburbs could do anywhere between 30 and 70% in the next 4 years. Sixth reason I like Brisbane at the moment is the vacancy rates. Obviously, vacancy rates in many parts of Australia are extremely low right now, but most of the high quality inner city, beachside and medium ring suburbs in Brisbane are sitting with a vacancy rate right now below 1%. Now, a vacancy rate is a really good indicator as an investor for how easily and quickly you can fill your property. Historically speaking, any vacancy rate below 2% would mean that the suburb is undersupplied from a rental perspective and generally means that rents will go up and you should be able to fill the property quite quickly. Now, on top of this, CoreLogic is expecting rents to rise in Brisbane by at least another 10% or $100 per week in the next 12 months during the end of 2023 and 24. Now, another reason I like Brisbane is I was recently looking at a report from CoreLogic, and when they look at a 30-year period of data, they looked at the average house price in Sydney and the average house price in Brisbane over that period of time. Now, obviously, at different stages of the cycle, prices in Sydney go up, then prices in Brisbane go up, prices in Sydney come down, prices in Brisbane go down. But when they averaged all of that data out over time, the average difference between a house in Brisbane and the house in Sydney was around about 50%. Now, right now, the difference in house prices between Brisbane and Sydney is sitting at over 90%, which says to me that historically speaking, Brisbane is undervalued at the moment and has the potential to catch up to Sydney shortly. I was recently reading another great article from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and they're expecting the population in Brisbane to continue to flourish and boom over time. Now, at the moment, Brisbane's sitting just under that 2.5 million people mark, and the wider southeast Queensland area is obviously big as well. But over the next 20 to 21 years, the ABS is forecasting that the population of Brisbane is going to get to 5 million people, which is the current size of Sydney and Melbourne. What's even more impressive is in the CBA report called the State of States report, where they look at how different states are performing economically at one point in time during the year. Brisbane's average incomes have jumped so much recently that they're now within 5% of Sydney, and the average household income in Brisbane is even higher than Melbourne. Now, if we look at one of the big drivers of growth in cities from a capital perspective, as well as increasing in rents, we need to look at infrastructure. In Brisbane at the moment, there is so much going on. There's cranes all the way through the city doing private projects. But on top of that, you've got the Metro line, which is 8 new stations for the first time going underneath the river in Brisbane. You've got all of the infrastructure going into South Bank and all of the arenas and stadiums throughout Brisbane as we move to the Olympic Games. Down there on the Gold Coast, you've got the continuation of the light rail project and the completion of the heavy rail project. You've also got an incredible hospital that's just been refurbed down there. Up here on the sunny coast, it's the same thing. All of the roads, all of the hospitals are being upgraded. And for the first time in history, we're going to have a decent heavy rail and light rail system going before the Olympic Games. Now, all of this infrastructure isn't just great for locals who are living in the area, but it creates jobs and high-paying jobs and drives people into the area. Now, since we came back from Christmas this year at the start of 2023, I've noticed a massive change in sentiment. Now, there are a lot of people that are still out there that are freaked out in the current market, and I completely understand why. People are coming back into the market. They've got to the point where they understand rates are going to sit at around about 6%, and they understand that many people are going to sit out, but they're confronting their own fear and they're taking advantage of conditions while sentiment has been a little bit lower. Now, in many of the suburbs in Brisbane, prices have gone back up at least $50,000 since the start of the year. And we're noticing that houses are selling much faster at the moment. Many more people are showing up, and the terms on the offers on the average contract are much, much better. These are all positive signs that the market is coming back. But when we look at the big picture, according to Tim Lawless from CoreLogic, we're not going to see a massive, massive rush back until interest rates either stabilize, or according to him, they may drop even by somewhere up to 1 to 1.25% before the end of 2024. If that happens, confidence will return to the market and prices will continue to go up. Now, one of the major misconceptions about the Brisbane market is Brisbane is one massive city. Now, when you look at the likes of Sydney or Melbourne, yes, they are a city from a big perspective, but there are multiple local council areas and very, very diverse local economies and regions within those cities. Brisbane's no different. There's 5 key parts of Brisbane. There's the CBD, there's North, South, West Brisbane, and then there's all of the beaches on the east of Brisbane as well. Now, these different markets all have different local economies, different sectors within them, different qualities of infrastructure and schools. Now, some of the areas in Brisbane, like the CBD and the eastern beaches, have literally doubled in the last 10 years, but you can get 5 kilometres away from those areas and you can be looking at suburbs that over the same period of time have only done 50 to 60%. And that is one of the most special parts of Brisbane at the moment. Where in Melbourne and Sydney, the rising tide in the last 10 years has lifted all of the boats equally and everything is completely priced at the moment. In Brisbane, there are still bargains absolutely everywhere. It's super, super, super affordable. There's many parts of the city where you can still buy property for 500 to 600K. And there's absolutely blue chip inner city property and beachside property fund at $800,000 still, making Brisbane like a very, very, very attractive option for many people, which is why in the last couple of years since COVID, it's been one of the fastest growing regions from a population perspective in all of Australia. To round it out, I think there's a whole bunch of positives and negatives in the economy at the moment, as there is in Brisbane. But overall, there's some incredible data coming out of Brisbane at the moment with the population growth, the infrastructure growth, the coming Olympic Games, and the vacancy rates sitting at the levels they are. Now, if you've been looking at Brisbane for a little while and are seriously thinking about buying in the next 12 months, I'd love to offer you a one-on-one strategy session where we can talk about exactly where you are today, where you'd like to be longer term. I can educate you deeply on the Brisbane market and the best parts of the city, and then you can take that information and either go and absolutely smash it on yourself and get yourself a great property in an undervalued suburb, or potentially you can become one of the extremely small number of clients that we work with each month in our buyer's agency, Pumped on Property, and we can be a part of your journey, help you get a great property in the city, and work towards your longer goals of financial freedom and choices in your life. But either way, we wish you all the best. We absolutely love Brisbane at the moment. In the last 8 years as a business, we bought more than $400 million worth of property up here, which is more than anybody else on the planet. We are super excited about the market and can't wait for you to take advantage of it while it's still cheap.
Woo! That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Getting
Have a
cool,
spin.
bro. Yeah. Oh, sweaty. So sweaty. Oh, that's good. Look at that.
So nice, eh?
Oh.